This is At Ease, the military podcast of Thomas Nelson Community College. I'm Gary Pounder, a member of the military team here at TNCC. And on today's podcast, we're going to kind of be revisiting an issue that we've covered frequently here on the podcast, that being military transition, that career that will come next after you hang up the uniform. And visiting this topic in the past, we've talked about everything from working in the skilled trades to becoming an entrepreneur to even continuing your military service as a member of the National Guard and Reserve. Well, on today's podcast, we're going to look at a path a little bit less traveled. That is the possibility perhaps of becoming a working actor after you leave the military. And our guest on the program here today is done just that. He has carved out a remarkable career as a performer and as a producer over the past 25, 26 years since retiring from the U.S. Army. And we'll be speaking with him here in just a moment. But first of all, I want to remind you, if you're a military-affiliated student, you're looking to start, continue, or maybe finish your education, learn more about how Thomas Nelson can help you achieve your goals. We have more than 80 degree and certificate programs, many completely online. Our classes are flexible and affordable with in-person, hybrid, and online delivery formats, and tuition that's well below the tuition assistance cap, no matter where you may be stationed in the military. If you'd like more information for active duty members, Guard and Reserve personnel, and military spouses, call this number, 757-825-2938. If you're using VA benefits, call this number, 757-825-3442, or visit tncc.edu/military. Success. It's closer than you think at Thomas Nelson, the Peninsula's community college. And as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, we are joined today by a retired Army officer who has carved out a very successful and unique career as an actor. And I won't give you his name just yet. I'm going to let him, I should say, deliver one of his most famous lines and see if you can kind of put the voice with a face that you have surely seen in the movies, on TV, and even on stage.
It's 7:22 in the morning, Saturday the 15th of April. The president is no more.
And that voice belongs to Bob Shepard. If you saw Steven Spielberg's Lincoln, which was out in theaters about 9-10 years ago, he played the very pivotal role of the doctor who pronounced Abraham Lincoln dead after his assassination. And that is one of many roles that Bob Shepard has played during his career as a working actor. And he has done that as a working actor based here in Virginia. Bob, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here on the podcast.
Well, Gary, it's my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
We sure welcome you here on the program. Let's kind of start off at the beginning with you. You are, like me, a native of Missouri, grew up on a farm, I believe. How does a farm boy in Missouri go from that background to becoming a very successful working actor with a couple of equally successful careers as an educator and as an Army officer in between?
Well, it took me a long time. The start was, though, I always wanted to be an actor. When I was on the farm in the Ozarks, I loved movies. I think I actually played cowboys making movies instead of just regular, cowboys. But loved it. But I had a hard time. Part of it, in all honesty, I think was my own immaturity. I just didn't have quite what it took to, after high school, for example, get on a bus and head to LA or head to New York. I just wasn't ready to do that. But over the years, there were several starts and stops because I never lost that desire to actually be an actor. But when I went to college, Missouri State University in Springfield, instead of the theater department, which I was part of a short time, I switched over and became an elementary ed major and went back home and taught school for several years. But all of the time, down deep, there was that need, if you will. I really feel it was a calling to be an actor. So one of the summers, when I was, after I made a little money teaching, I spent the summer out in LA with an aunt that lived in San Fernando. And I had wanted, I thought I'd love to be on TV. Well, In the Ozarks, we had only one channel, which was NBC, because in those days you had this long, long antenna, and we were lucky to get one channel, actually. So there was a show called The Dating Game, and I thought, wow, that would be really fun to be on, even though I'd never seen it. So I called up Chuck Barris Productions, and they said, yeah, Friday night we're having an open call. So I went out, and they throw all these crazy questions to you, and at the end, don't call us, we'll call you. But lo and behold, they said, oh, we want you to come for a callback. So the next week I went, and again, throwing these crazy questions to you, and then I was booked for the show. So I had accomplished my goal. I was going to be on national TV. This is 1970 now, so it was a while back. And so we were on the show, and the young lady who was going to be selecting the bachelors asked all kinds of questions, but one of hers, she said, so, Bob, what do you spray all over yourself to get rid of the ugly girls? And without missing a beat, I said, well, actually, my dear, I've never met an ugly girl. They're all beautiful in their own way. And the audience claps and so on. And then, lo and behold, Jill picks me. She selected me. So we're backstage, and I said, hey, Jill, why did you select me? Thinking she'd say, oh, Bob, your answers were so clever. Well, she didn't. She said, I was so nervous, I couldn't remember what anybody said. I liked the sound of your voice. So it was that. There were other opportunities. I finally ended up leaving education, going into the military. After 3 years, though, I resigned my commission, and my wife and I moved to L.A., to try to get very serious about pursuing this dream that I had long had. And unfortunately, after our daughter was born, my wife had a major health issue. So again, it wasn't quite the time yet. So we ended up going back to Missouri, teaching school, joined the Guard, ultimately getting back on active duty and working to retirement. But Gary, even when I was here, I brought to Fort Monroe as the National Public Affairs Officer for the ROTC program at Cadet Command. But I got an agent before I retired and started booking jobs because I knew that's what I wanted to do. So when the time came to retire, I already had an agent and I had credits. And so it was really a very nice transition, but I couldn't have done it without the benefit of the United States Army.
And I want to talk to you about your military career here just a bit. First of all, what was it that prompted you? Because you were teaching elementary school at a time when not many men were going on that track. And, kudos to you for taking that role on, because young children, we've discovered, need that male influence in the early grades. And we're seeing more men go into elementary ed right now. But what was it that made you decide to leave education and then go and join the U.S. Army?
I actually thought, because I was beginning to get older all the time, and I thought I had to do something rather radical to pull me out of that and force me to move down the path that I wanted to go, And so the military was it, I think.
Well, you joined the Army in the early to mid 1970s, and at that time it's post-Vietnam, the military is winding down. All the services, to include the Army, are having their share of issues, to include drug usage in the ranks. There were racial conflicts, strife that was going on there. We were trying to integrate women to a greater degree in the military. That must have been kind of a tough environment for you as a junior officer. What were your experiences like in that post-Vietnam Army, and were there days when you thought, maybe I made a mistake in jumping out of education and getting in the military?
Well, it really was, and there was a period of time, because as the war had wound down, the quality of the troops was not what it had been previously. So we had a lot of young people, I guess, trying to find themselves. I don't know what all the problems were, and there were problems, but I loved it. I loved the soldiers. I loved the opportunity to be part of that. And honestly, I was surprised that I was. And so even though I had left the Army, down deep, I always had such a good feeling about it, and ultimately I felt I would like to go back to do that. And thankfully, I was selected to come back on active duty as a reserve officer in the regular Army.
Now, early on, if I'm not mistaken, you were a military policeman. You were a provost marshal. Your experiences in that, I was wondering if they influenced, if they helped you later on in your various roles as an actor.
Well, of course, I played a police captain, and head of the unit, actually in a series called Precinct 757, and I just finished a role a couple of weeks ago as Captain Robbins. That's head of a group that actually, in this case, though, they go out and they're after these supernatural assassin kind of people. So, so I have had several opportunities to do that, and yes, I can relate to it from kind of firsthand experience, if you will.
Now, later on, you transitioned from being a provost marshal military police officer into public affairs. Tell us about that transition. And again, did moving into public affairs, was that a help to you as you began to prepare eventually for that career as a full-time actor?
It was a very critical part because I wanted to find something in the military career that helped me work with media. And so a public affairs officer, we do multiple things. We do a lot of interviews and those kind of things, but we also produce videos. I ended up narrating videos. I ended up writing scripts. I had the opportunity, though, to coordinate for my boss to be on the Today Show and Good Morning America and several major publications as well. So all of that media mix really got me as close to where I wanted to go and still be full-time on active duty in the Army.
Now, during your time in the Army, again, both on the military police side and on the public affairs side, during this period, were you doing any acting in community theater and theater groups on base? Were you still working at that craft as well?
Yes, especially on my first assignment at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I was in a production of Oklahoma, 1776. We had a patriotic show called Sing Out America. And the kind of ironically, as a lieutenant, I was called in by the chief of staff of the 101st. And he said, Lieutenant, I want a chorus. Mm-hmm. And you're going to be in charge of it. So I was detailed. And my whole opportunity, first of all, I had done a lot of singing, but I didn't even read music. So I found another lieutenant who was a music major. And then we conducted auditions. We ended up touring. And so for 6 months, I was basically the administrator, but also pretty well a full-time performer. And that was all in my first tour in the Army. And then other opportunities, I know when I was assigned to West Point. We were over Stewart Army Sub Post, which is a part of West Point at that point. But the Officers Club did a production of the Four-Poster, and I had the lead in that. Mm-hmm. So a lot of opportunities actually along the way to help me build a resume, if you will.
And that's very important when we talk about building a career as an actor. I was just curious because, again, we have a huge military community here locally, and I know we have young soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, coasties out there who may be thinking about, being an actor someday. For someone in that position right now, what kind of advice would you give them in terms of working at their craft while at the same time realizing they've got a full-time job in the military? How can they, do what you did, work at improving themselves as an actor while, again, at the same time meeting their obligations as a military member?
A lot of it probably depends upon the job they have. Some people, their jobs are so all-consuming that there's really little opportunity to do that. But in almost any communities that you go to, if not on the base or post itself, in the community there are these community theaters and theater productions. I also got great experience actually at a church doing the passion plays. Mm-hmm. So look at what's out there right in your own backyard, if you will. And any of those can actually help you get experience and build your confidence as an actor as well.
In terms of training, as an actor, what kind of advice would you give? We hear, about the top schools out there, the top learning environments. The Actors Studio is probably one of the most famous, Juilliard among others. There are a number of fine programs out there on the West Coast. But for, a young actor here in Virginia, what kind of options would you encourage in terms of getting the training, getting the experience they need to build the resume and work toward becoming a working actor?
Well, locally, a lot of the actors, agents, and other people, they have basically workshops, if you will, commercial workshops and other things. So many times your actors, agents, or other people, they will have classes in commercials, commercial workshops, or just there are schools. For example, over in Norfolk, I know there's they have classes every week, and they actually teach the Meisner method, if you will, that a lot of people are somewhat familiar with if you've been in the acting world. So look around. Here for sure, there's actually a lot of opportunities to continue to work and get experience. Another thing is a lot of our colleges have theater departments, for example, like Regent University. They are constantly making student films, and they hold auditions, and they're a great opportunity to get experience working. They usually don't pay anything, but my goodness, you can end up almost getting a reel of work by just working in some of those films. In my early days, I did many of these student films at Regent, but Old Dominion also has a department that does film work as well.
We should point out, too, here at Thomas Nelson, we also have a theater department, and we're one of the few community colleges in Virginia, and for that matter, the country, that actually offers an associate degree in liberal arts with a concentration in theater performance. So you can get some initial training here at Thomas Nelson while at the same time availing yourself of some of the opportunities that you were talking about here locally. And as you said, actually gain a fair amount of experience at a relatively young age.
Yes, and then, of course, Christopher Newport, I think you can, after you go here to Thomas Nelson, if you want to continue to pursue that, you can. They have also a theater and department as well.
Now, once you've kind of built that initial foundation of training and experience, then you have to make that decision about taking the big step and trying to make a go of it, on a full-time basis. Talk about that process, and especially in your own journey. Now, obviously, you were coming off active duty about 1996. You're going to have the military pension, that's coming in each month, which is a huge help. You're going to have health care through TRICARE. I believe your wife, she's a well-known local educator. She's principal of a local school or local schools here. So you were probably in a better position than many folks going into the acting business on a full-time basis. But still, was this something that you and your wife had decided long before, that when you retired from the Army that you were going to give it a shot as a full-time actor, or was this something that as you were approaching your ETS day, you said, honey, I think I'm going to give this acting thing a go, and, we'll just see what happens?
No, I think she was always on board. And part of that was a carryover from that experience we had now over 40 years ago in L.A. when we had to leave it, So she knew that, the time would come that would be the full-time effort. So she was totally on board, always incredibly supportive. And that helps as well, to make sure that at home everybody's on board, because sometimes I actually got no encouragement from parents or anyone else. The idea that you would want to go off and be an actor just kind of sounded crazy to them, Why would you want to do such a thing? So you don't always find a lot of understanding.
Sure.
And
sure.
And in this particular case, though, I was very fortunate. My wife was always on board and always my biggest helpmate, if you will.
Now, was there ever any thought given as you're getting ready to take the plunge and become a full-time actor to relocating to New York or Los Angeles? Because, again, most of the people in your profession, they pursue their vocation, their craft, in those cities. Or did you make a conscious decision, hey, I'm going to be a full-time actor, and I'm going to be based right here in Southeast Virginia.
We did decide that, and part of it was because I had already made the transition while I was in the military. So one of the hard things sometimes is even getting an agent. Well, I had already had 2 agents by the time I retired from the military. I'd had what's called headshots, pictures that you can help promote yourself. I had already had several credits, including a series of national commercials for Hardee's. That's how I became a member of Screen Actors Guild. So I had accomplished a lot of the basic, almost requirements to move into the acting field before I retired. So we actually had no thought of pulling up stakes here and moving further. It's a choice. And, my choice, I tried that 40 years ago. And for whatever reason, it wasn't quite right. But, when I left there in L.A., before I did, I had this really strong feeling that delay is not denial, that this acting career will happen. And, I feel very blessed that, in fact, now, approaching 30 years, I have actually been able to pursue it.
And you've been able to do it again here in Southeast Virginia. Now, you mentioned the fact that coming off of active duty, you already had 2 agents. And we know, even those of us who are not actors, we know the importance for folks in your profession to have someone to represent you, to help you find work. What were the keys for you in being able to get an agent to represent you?
Actually, it was part of my work as a public affairs officer. One of my first jobs when I came to Cadet Command, we were producing a training video. And on set was this delightful woman who was a makeup artist and actor. And we talked about the fact that I really wanted to pursue that. And so she introduced me actually to one of the top agents here at that time. It was an agency called Talent Connection. So again, it was a connection, but I was in the military, but it actually led me to connect to where I wanted to go as well. So she was very helpful. And I had a few credits. I mean, I'd already done the dating game. I had done some the extra work in LA, and I had several stage credits. So I had the beginning of a resume, but it is a challenge, and you have to not be discouraged because there are a lot of people that are, for whatever reason, they think it's glamorous, they think it's whatever it is, that are attracted. And so agents are a little bit picky, but don't give up. If that's what you want to do, keep building that resume, keep working, keep making connections, and then ultimately it'll happen. Agents, sometimes they'll have an open call to meet them. Otherwise, you just send your information to them, and they'll look over their stable, if you will, of actors and see if that would be a place that you would fit. So there's multiple ways, but agents can be very critical. Several of the biggest roles I've ever gotten, I would not have gotten if I did not have an agent. I wouldn't have been cast in Lincoln. I wouldn't have got the hearing assist commercial. All of those were through agents. So doesn't mean you can't work, but you really do need at some point to move forward to be signed up with an agency.
And I'd like to talk about some of your better known roles here in just a moment. But one thing I want to touch on is something that I always like to discuss with actors. You guys are in one of the toughest professions out there. As we were discussing before we started taping the podcast here today, at any given time, about 95% of the members of your union, SAG-AFTRA, are unemployed, which means you're going to have, no matter how successful you are, you're going to have some gaps in your employment. What do you do as an actor, knowing that, to stay motivated, to stay focused during those downtimes when you don't have that next role or the next project lined up?
I always tried to look around and find what other opportunities that there were besides the film work, because I think that's particularly what you're talking about, TV, movies, commercials, those kind of things. And really, it's kind of hot and cold. Sometimes there's so much you have to turn down work. Other times there's nothing there. So, for example, one of the things I did for 10 years, I worked at the Mystery Dinner Playhouse in Williamsburg. And every week the roles are like big cartoons, if you will, over the top. Sure. But great experience, and I was continuing to make income and money. to fill in those times. And another thing that I actually have done over the years to have some semblance of work coming up is I became a standardized patient at Eastern Virginia Medical School. And in those cases, you actually role play, so it is like improv acting, if you will, and they'll train you to a case, and you might have diverticulitis, you might have diabetes. I'm old enough now, it may be some of the geriatric issues, but whatever it is. So I have been doing that as a fill-in, if you will, to the film work since the 90s as
Now,
well.
are you getting paid as
Oh, yes,
okay.
you do. You get paid. And they have different levels. They have like three levels, and if you hang around long enough, like I am, I'm paid at level 3, which is the top. But it's an hourly. For the most part, it's hourly. Sometimes, if you go on what they call a trip, because so many schools do not have these standardized patients or physical teaching associates, so sometimes it's a contract, and they'll say you get X amount of dollars for doing the whole trip. But yes, it's always paid.
Let's talk about voice acting. It seems like voice acting, it's always been around, but it has really exploded as an option for actors, for other performers over the last 20, 25 years, with everything from podcasting to the resurrection of animation projects, video games, things like that. How involved have you been in voice acting, and what part of your career is now devoted to that particular craft?
Well, I have never fully just concentrated on it, but there have certainly been opportunities to do that. For example, I was in the studio Friday, and I cut a new 60-second radio commercial for Hearing Assist. And then many times for that particular project, they'll call me back into the studio because they changed the tagline. Like now they've got one going to come out emphasizing like the holiday time, or they've added new numbers or whatever. So that has become a very common kind of thing. I have chosen not to just concentrate on voice work because I like to do it all, you know. But there is, for example, Studio Center, where I'm in the on-camera talent side. There's a whole group of people that are just there to do the voice work.
Sure. And
it's very competitive, but if that's what you would like to do, and I will tell you, you can be very well compensated. It can be a great career and just concentrate on the voice work. And we happen to have a place called Studio Center that really concentrates on that.
I'd like to talk, too, about some of the roles you played. And you mentioned the Hearing Assist commercial, which many people know you for. It's been running for several years now, different versions. I'm just curious, describe the process that led you to getting that role. And would you say that is perhaps your best known role over a 30-plus year career as an actor?
What? Yes. It has really been kind of incredible because it's a national spot. So it has caused me to become recognized, if you will, all over the country. And so it's been very interesting, I guess rewarding, but I had done enough work that when I'd go somewhere, I'd have people kind of look at me like, that guy looks a little familiar. Well, for example, back in the earlier part of the summer, I flew out to Oregon to work on a pilot for a TV series, and I had to, in some of the scenes, I had to wear a tuxedo, so I was carrying it in a clothing bag. I handed it to the flight attendant, and when I got off in Denver, she gave it to me, and she said, "What?" She says, "I see your commercials all the time." And I said, "How did you recognize me?" Because I'm wearing a face mask. I'd grown a beard for the role. I'm wearing glasses, which I don't in the commercials. She said, "It was the sound of your voice and your eyes." So, it really has kind of opened up a recognition. Occasionally people will come over and say, "I'd like to get a selfie. Can we take a picture?" So it's been fun. It's been rewarding. And this particular commercial, for some reason, has hit an emotional level with people that I had never expected. People will say, that reminds me of my dad or my grandpa, or, I wish I had that kind of relationship with my dad. It just goes on and on and on. So it's been quite incredible. But it started with basically my agent at Studio Center said, hey, they'd like you to audition. And so I did the read, and they selected me. And now it's been, I don't know, I guess we're going on about 4 years here.
Wow.
Fairly soon.
And you've had how many different versions of that commercial have aired?
Well, there is the 60, and then there's the 30-second spots that are there as well. And now, as I said, they've transitioned over to radio as well.
And I'm sure the question you get asked every time someone brings up the hearing assist commercial, even though the initial spot was film taped 4 years ago, are you still getting paid every time it airs?
The way that this is set up is that you sort of get paid by the job as opposed to every time it runs. But they have been very, very supportive, and they certainly pay very well. Now, I did a Geico commercial a few years ago where I played a minister marrying this couple on
I remember
the beach.
that one, yes.
And actually, it's one that every time it played, you would get residuals.
Now, do you find that doing commercial works, I guess it could kind of be a dual-edged sword. Are you concerned, first of all, about getting typecast as being the hearing assist guy? And that may prevent you from getting other roles. But conversely, at the same time, it certainly increases your exposure, which may open up the opportunity to get other acting parts.
That's a very interesting question, and I think it's kind of a wash, if you will. I think there could be some of that. I have a feeling sometimes I may lose out on a part because they'll say all they're going to think about is that guy, in the commercial. But others, they think, hey, it's going to help bring some kind of recognition to the project as well. So I've been very fortunate this year. In the pilot for the Hope For TV series, I played God. That's a pretty big role.
Yes, indeed.
And then I just got back from Minnesota, where I played a patient in a mental ward called Let Me Have My Son. So, the opportunity, it hasn't kept me from having those opportunities. Does it affect? Maybe. But I would say for the most part, it's simply sort of expanded my pool of recognition, if you will.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about your experience in working with Steven Spielberg on Lincoln, what that was like. I believe you were the first Virginia actor cast in that film. Daniel Day-Lewis played the title role. What was that experience like?
Well, it was kind of like an out-of-body experience, to tell you the truth. I had done so many things, all kinds of student films, industrial films, low-budget films. I'd worked as an extra in probably 50 major motion pictures, but I'd been primarily an extra. So to be on set and to be directed by one of the top directors was really almost an out-of-body experience. But it was very interesting on the day. It was actually moved to the last day they were filming. The rumor was that they had to move it to the last day. And I noticed they kept moving my shoot date further down. And the rumor was that if they let Daniel Day-Lewis die earlier, he wouldn't come back and do any other scenes. So they kept moving it. He's such a... he's really one of those that totally lives the part, and he's got 2 Oscars, too. So he's fabulous. But anyway, that was kind of the rumor. He totally lives the part. So the day came, and I'd already had to go to wardrobe and hair several months earlier. They designed a very nice Union 1-star general's officer uniform for me. And so I'm on set that day. And while I'm a principal, I did not have a stand-in. I don't know why, but it actually worked to my advantage because I was getting more familiar with the set. I was there as they were setting lights, all of that, kind of thing to sort of get ready. And so finally they say, the governor's coming. Well, I thought it might be Bob McDonnell, who was governor at the time, but no, that's what they called Spielberg on the set. And they called Daniel Day-Lewis Mr. President. So anyway, I found out how that worked. So he gets there, and we have a row of people around the bed, different cabinet officers, other people. And he turns to me and he said, well, I guess it was me. I knew it was me because there's only two of us that have lines in that scene. And I had the first. So he said, I'd like to hear your line. So I said it, and he said, well, I'd like you to bring it down a little bit. So I said it again, and he said, I'd like you to bring the word president down. So I knew then that he wanted it totally delivered with absolutely no inflection or emotion at all, kind of like I delivered it at the first of the interview today. And so from then on, we probably filmed it 25 times because the camera would be here and we'd do 4 takes and then move, finally to get behind me. And they did it again. And I never got another note from him as far as the delivery of the lines. The other thing that I had no idea, I had to manipulate a wooden stethoscope. Now, I didn't know they had such a thing, but it's like a cone and kind of flared at the bottom, and apparently if you place it on a patient's chest, it helps amplify the breathing sounds, or maybe the heart sounds. I don't know for sure, but anyway, I had that thing. In addition, I had to pull out a watch, and I had to flip it so the lid would open up so I could refer to it. So it doesn't sound like much, but you got to figure out, hit your marks, do this, do that, pull the cover back from Mr. Lewis once they brought him to set. But it was probably the most pleasant experience that I have ever had. And thankfully, it went extremely well, so I felt very blessed. And when it was over, Mr. Spielberg looked at the whole group of people in particular, and he said, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then they held me at the end of the sound stage because he had to go check the footage and make sure he had it. So once that was done, I was released, went back to the trailer and changed. I was coming back through the building where the set was and also the production offices, and they were all saying goodbye to each other. And Mr. Spielberg was saying goodbye to one of the hairdressers, and I stopped about 6 feet away from him. And as soon as he finished, he walked over, and we had a very pleasant conversation that I'll always treasure. So I have nothing but incredibly good feelings about that. And I felt that experience helped me move me up into a little bit, higher level, if you will, in the acting career.
We often hear the term in the movies about a director being an actor's director, someone who's really collaborating with the actors to produce the best possible result on the screen. Did you find Spielberg to be an actor's director?
Well, I will tell you, the only thing that happened is what I told you. We got there were no other, but he set down what he wanted, and then he would have interacted had he not gotten it. And I thought it's kind of interesting. The other actor that had lines played Edmund Stanton, the Secretary of War, and he's the one that at the end of it says now he belongs to the ages, which is a little controversial. Some say now he belongs to the angels. Some say agents, whatever. He said agents. So this actor who had like 134 credits, Mr. Spielberg came over and whispered to him, I need you to bring it down a little bit. So he gave that actor the very same note that he gave me early on. And I think he wanted the moment to carry, not he didn't want anything that didn't seem real, at the time. And he would have certainly interjected if he needed to. The other thing that was so incredible was this crew that he had all worked together for years and years. And at one point, the director of photography called out while they were setting up the scene, I need you to change this, I need you to set this up like we did for Munich. Well, Munich, they filmed in 2005, and this is many years later, but the crew knew exactly what the director of photography was talking about. So they worked together so seamlessly,
Well, you see that with some of the better-known filmmakers in Hollywood. Clint Eastwood's probably the most famous for that. He used the same director of photography for 20 or 30 years. He used the same set dresser for 40 to 50 years, and his editor has been editing all of his productions for well over 30 years, and they say that his editor's got the easiest job in Hollywood because Eastwood rarely does more than 3 takes of a scene. So he's got only a limited amount of film to go through and work with in assembling that final scene for the film.
I actually worked as an extra on the Sands of Iwo Jima, and he ran the quietest set I have ever been on. He just simply kind of walked around. There was no action. They had a dolly track in front of us because I was supposed to be a representative or senator at the dedication in D.C. And John, the guy sitting next to me, I said, "John, the camera's moving." We got it just all of a sudden, here the camera's on the track with the photographer. And Mr. Eastwood just stayed calm and cool and walked around looking it all over. So I've never seen anyone work quite as quietly as he did.
I've heard stories, too, that many of the crew are disappointed to be hired on an Eastwood film because they anticipate they're going to be getting overtime, shoots that go long into the day, into the evening, and that Eastwood is so efficient as a filmmaker. Invariably, if it's a daytime shoot, he's done and finished by 5 o'clock. So your overtime is out the window. You're back at the hotel, getting ready for the next day.
Yes. And I'd worked on another film that he did, and sometime we did have an evening meal. And he's producer, director, star. 3 different roles. Sometime he picks up a tray and stands in line and gets served just like everybody else, and then he sat down with the extras. So he certainly had a lot of credibility with, at least from the extras, as being just a real down-to-earth kind of guy,
Let's talk about some of the other roles you played, roles that maybe stand out in your memory that people, when you mention them, will say, "Yeah, that was him. I remember seeing him in that film." Talk about a few of those other roles that you played down through the years.
Well, one that you would probably think I'm an extra, but actually I was a day player for 4 days as Evan Almighty, and it shows constantly. And so we had, I got a call from my agent, even though it was filmed up in here in Virginia. They said, "Why don't you go down to Wilmington and audition for the Finn Cannons?" And so it was a Friday. I went down Saturday, and all they had you do was react to different things. No lines, just reacting. And then Monday they said, "Oh, got to get to set. You've been cast." So if you watch the movie, I'm kind of like a featured extra. But anyway, I spent 4 days by Stephen Carell's side. And when the director was seating everybody, I didn't quite understand because there was a seat empty next to where he put me, but I didn't realize that was going to be where Steve Carell was going to be. So it was a delightful experience, and it's probably the most frequently shown film of any. Lincoln's shown a lot, but Evan Almighty is constantly being shown, and of course that generates residuals, so you're happy for. One of those that was kind of interesting, though, for a hillbilly from the Ozarks is a movie that was out a couple of years ago called First Lady, and I played the king of a foreign country, and end up using an accent that's kind of a combination of several different foreign. You hear a little French, you hear a little Irish. But it was really a delightful role to do, and it certainly took me out of my normal league of experience. But I also like to be cast kind of against type. And there was a series called The Dark. I think it's The Dark, the Great Deceiver. And it's one of these last days dystopian kind of things. And my character has totally given over to the dark side. He's a crazy old farmer. And he and his wife are just as loony as they can be. but it was really fun. It was really a fun experience because people look at me and they want to make me the doctor, the lawyer, the preacher, So to do that was great. Just like the one that I just finished, Sonny, that's a member of the mental ward. And it was an incredible, Sonny took me to a place I've never been before.
What kind of part would you like to play that you have not been able to play so far? I guess we're kind of throwing this out there to all the casting directors and producers, directors who may be listening to our podcast. What kind of role would Bob Shepard like to play that, again, you've not had a chance to play until this point in your career?
Well, only on the cursory level have I been able to play, but what I would love to do, I love Westerns. So any role in a Western film, I would absolutely love. When I was small, cowboys were king. It was Lone Ranger, Roy Rogers, all of those. So it just made such an imprint on me. So I've always, even now, if I'm watching movies and there's a Western movie, I'll probably pick it. So I would love to play. In fact, my production company has a script. And if we could get people to decide to come in and help us make it, I would actually play an old-time, in modern day, but he's an old cowboy that kind of lives in the West by the name of Spurs.
Okay.
So that's one I would love to be able to do before I get too old to get on a horse.
I'm glad you brought that up. We'll talk about your role as a producer here in a moment. You've also been part of a number of faith-based productions, and obviously faith is an important part of your life. Just curious how you happen to get involved in that particular genre of pictures, and do you think it's getting easier for faith-based movies to get made today in Hollywood?
Well, I think the answer is yes, but it's not exactly always the best for independent producers like me. What has happened now is the major studios saw that as a great revenue-making thing. So you've got a firm, and you've got Sony now has bought PureFlix. So a lot of the major studios are buying up these production companies, and then all of a sudden now they're Hollywood productions, basically. So in the past, it was more of an independent group of people, and they're still there. There's a lot of them out there, but it's harder, I think, for an independent producer now to some extent. The one thing makes it easier, though, is that streaming is the venue now, and you can almost get anything streamed somewhere. May not be as much as you want, but my most current production, it's just been out a couple of months now. It's called Past Shadows, and we call it a supernatural faith-based film, and it's on Amazon Prime, and it's on Christian Cinema, and it's also on a channel called CMAX TV that you have to use a browser. And then later in December, it's going to be on Encourage TV and Tubi and a whole bunch of other places as well.
Tell us about that film, because as you indicated, this is kind of maybe a new page for the faith-based genre in the sense that it's more of a supernatural sci-fi type film. What attracted you to that project, and tell us kind of the synopsis of what the film is all about?
Well, I think what attracted me is the fact that it was written by my production partner. And he is always, Jesse Sanzo, is always great to write a role for me. So this role of Charles Bando, the professor who's the lead, was specifically written for me and by. So, great opportunity. So much of my time has been character actors, and sometimes I'm in 2 or 3 scenes, that may be it. Well, this is the lead. So I'm from beginning to end. So that was very attractive. But the storyline, and it starts with a really tragic incident, that happened at church of all places. It breaks up the professor's family. He's estranged. He goes to another community and takes on a new professorship just to kind of, clear his mind and try to figure out what it all means. Well, lo and behold, he has to teach basically a class that a faith-based class, which he doesn't really want to either because he's kind of been stung, but he does it. Well, lo and behold, one of his students collects glass. And his uncle, played by Corbin Burnson, is an archaeologist. And he sends him a piece of glass from the Holy Land, from Golgotha. And ultimately, that works its way into some glasses that he made. And when you put these glasses on, you can see in the past. And ultimately, it helps bring reconciliation.
Now, you've done a couple of projects with Corbin Burnson. What's it like to work with him?
Oh, he's great. The reason we were able to get him for our film, Past Shadows, which he came in for one day, but I had worked with him, this is 2018, and he did a film at Smithfield called Mary for Mayor. And I auditioned for him, and he cast me. And of course, we're working, but he's busy. He's producer, actor, so I can't say we hung out, although we were together about 4 days. And then when we were getting ready to do Past Shadows, we said, hey, we really need to get somebody with some name recognition. And so I said, well, I'll try. So I found his email and wrote him an email and said, hey, sir, this is Franklin from Mary for Mayor, which is my character. And we've got this small independent film. We'd love for you to help us out. And lo and behold, he said, if you can film it during this time frame, I'll do it. And and I'm on set, and all of a sudden I get a call from him, and he says, Bob, I'm sorry, but all flights have been canceled out of Manhattan because of summer storms. But he said, don't worry, I'll be there even if I have to rent a car. And so ultimately I got with his assistant, and we got him on the train and got him down to Ashland, and where he spent the night, and then we brought him to set the next day. But he couldn't have been nicer. He was incredible. And in that year, for whatever reason, then there was a third film, the First Lady film, that when I played this king of a European country, it was a flashback. Technically, I'm his father in that movie. So we actually had 3 films that were in 2018, all of which are out on Amazon Prime at this point.
And I think that, again, illustrates the point you brought up earlier, how the connections in the business work. If you had not worked with him before, you probably wouldn't have gotten him for the film that you guys just wrapped a short time ago. What's ahead for Bob Shipper?
One of the things you mentioned about voiceover that I had never done was to do a cartoon. And so we have one called, the title is called Benny the Barnacle. And I play Obadiah the Ancient Oyster. So, that's kind of one of those bucket list things that I can cross off that we'll be able to do. It's just now working on the pilot, but ultimately there will be a series behind that. So that, and then actually due to some encouragement I had, I have I guess it's a memoir rather than autobiography, I don't know, called Delay Is Not Denial, My Story. So that book should be coming out here in the next week or so. And again, it'll be on Amazon, or you can get it through all the major book outlets as well. And then in January, I'm supposed to be a doctor in a film called David's Star. And ultimately, I have a sort of a dystopian film called Isolatum that's supposed to be filming next year, and a Western series called White Rider that I'm supposed to be the mayor. So those are things out there, but every day is a new day. Some things fall off, they don't get the money, then something out of the blue comes up. So I feel very blessed. It's always an adventure.
Some final words of advice for our military folks out there that are transitioning, maybe veterans who've come out of active duty here recently who were thinking about getting into acting. Again, give them some words of advice, encouragement on how they should go about pursuing that dream. I
think, I don't mean to put this down at all, but I think, first of all, you only really need to do it if you feel like that's what you need to do, because it is a tough world, and rejection is just around the corner. It doesn't matter how good you are, how many roles you've played. Everybody has their own project and they're looking for their own reasons. So you have to be ready for rejection. You have to be ready for, all kinds of things. So make sure that's what you really want to get yourself into. And if it is, then just keep at it, don't let setbacks keep you, make you disappointed. Look for other things. There will be other opportunities. Look around. And I believe that eventually, I really think perseverance, talent is important, yes, and I hope I have some, but I feel like perseverance has probably been the most important aspect of my being able to get at where I am.
And last question, what do you think a military member, former military member, what is perhaps the one quality they would bring to the table potentially as an actor that could really help them make this transition and make a go of it in a very difficult profession?
I would say discipline. I think discipline is so important. You have the discipline. You need to learn your lines. You need to you need to listen. You need to be open. You need to be open to following instruction. And I think a military person, that's just kind of embedded in them. And there's a lot of actors there, like George Kennedy, for example, and Lee Marvin, and all of those were in the military for a long time, and then they had great, successful careers. So the other thing I think is just try to enjoy the process. Because if you wait to when you're going to make it, whatever make it is, because that's really different from each individual, but enjoy the process. And that can be the rejection, that can be the success of winning, whatever it is. So don't forget to enjoy where you are. And then ultimately, I think you're going to be a lot happier when you finally maybe get to that, what you consider success.
Bob, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here on the podcast today.
It is my pleasure, and I wish anyone that is interested in, that's a vet that's interested in transitioning, regardless of what your dream is, just remember, delay is not denial, and that you can actually, I believe, achieve it.
Some very good words of advice. That's Bob Shepard. He is a very successful actor and producer. You've seen him pretty much everywhere. He has a number of projects coming out. Be on the lookout for those. And again, he's pursued this career, made a successful career as an actor right here in Newport News, Virginia. We want to thank him again for being on the podcast. Again, if you want to find out more about the military programs we have here at Thomas Nelson Community College, you can visit our military webpage at tncc.edu/military. I'm Gary Pounder. Join us again next time on At Ease.